on the back table in the middle. We're going to have a couple speakers tonight, which is great. I'm looking forward to introducing them. Some of you will know Kent Owens. He was Jesus in our church play. And he used to stuff grapes in my toes when I was Peter, sitting right here. And he had to wash my feet, and he would put grapes in my toes while I had to face the crowd and say my lines. And tonight is payback, my friend. So many times I wanted the opportunity. All kidding and joking aside, I'm not going to pay him back. He's a good guy. The Bible says not to do that. I break a lot of the rules that are in that Bible. No, he's a good guy. We also have Roger Madison from Madison Pool Investments. I'll introduce these guys as they come up. But I love both these guys. They're genuine, awesome guys that know what they're doing. And that's important, to get good advice from somebody that can give good advice because they know what they're doing. Try not to get advice from somebody that's not in the field. My example is this. When people come to me, I often tell them I'm a podiatrist. I look at feet, okay? And when you come in and ask a question about your teeth, you're at the wrong place. You need a dentist. It's funny, though, in the financial servicing industry, how rarely professionals talk to one another. In the field of investments, it's very common for the CPA to run in his lane, the lender, the mortgage planner to stay in his lane, the financial planner to kind of stay in his lane, the attorney to kind of stay in his lane, and sometimes they talk, but you'd be surprised how little it happens. I ask people all the time, have your financial planner and your CPA put together a strategy for you? I ask those questions because it's often they haven't even spoken to both of them. Some people keep those things separate. These guys aren't that way. We'll talk about some of that stuff through tonight and the next couple weeks. The key is this. If you walked into a doctor's office, those guys are used to coordinating strategy. I go see my family practice doctor. My example, I had ingrown toenails. He didn't do that. The podiatrist did, right? I went into the guy, and he looked at my feet, and he said, man, put the sock back on. Same thing my wife's told me for 23 years. All kidding and joking aside again, I'm glad he had a coordinated strategy with a person that's an expert. Now, he knew enough about feet to be dangerous. He could tell me about them. In fact, he probably knows enough about teeth to be dangerous, but he wouldn't do my dental work because doctors train. These two guys, they are expertise in investing, in finance. They're good at it. But when you start talking about tax strategies, they're probably going to give you basic advice, but they're going to send you off to an expert. That'd be a CPA. When you start talking about mortgages, they're going to send you off to an expert and so forth. That's important, but that coordinated strategy needs to happen more often, and it doesn't happen enough. And if I started taking a poll in here and asking questions, many people I would say, did you sit down with your CPA this year and do a plan so you can eliminate or at least reduce some of your taxes? Most people don't do that. They sit down at tax time and just kind of see what the damage is. But they don't sit down to plan through the year, right? Many people don't sit down and go to a financial planner at least once a year to do a review or a preview process. I know both of these guys do that. That's important. You need to be setting a plan in place. And your insurance professional, your mortgage lender, all those things are important to sit down and plan. Because the adage, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So tonight, let's get into what God's word first says about investing. And I want to start out with just a quick little funny cartoon that I got sent to me one time. I took a picture of it with my cell phone, and I'm going to show it to you up here. If you guys could put that first slide up, whoever's running the slides up there, or sleeping with the slides. All right, I think they're coming. We'll give them a second. I could buy a little time. So we're going to get God's word a little bit tonight, just to start out. And before I do that, let's just go ahead and say a quick word of prayer. Father, I love you. I just pray tonight that we be open to what you have to say to us. Thank you for the 2 speakers we have. We just give you glory, honor, and praise. And we just pray that we follow in your guidance, your direction in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen. So when it comes to finances and investing, many people start the game way too late. It's often that we get later in life, we finally get the kids out, we finally start getting our bills down, and then we realize it's time to save for that elusive retirement, and then the nest egg doesn't get as big as we want it to. And we hear things about compound interest, and we hear things about saving money, and we hear all these things when we're young, but we just didn't quite have the money to do it, right? Many people, they're trying, they think about it, and they say things like this: boy, I wish I would have known this when I was your age. Anybody ever heard that? I wish I would have known that when I was your age. You know how many times I've heard that? Well, I usually respond saying, hey, do you know that you should eat right and exercise? Who doesn't know that in this place? But that's knowing it and doing it, 2 different things, right? Those are 2 different things. Okay, everybody knows we should save money and put it away for a rainy day. The Bible's full of parables about it. It's full of stories about it. We should all be saving. Today, just as we're getting this thing working, looks like we're having some technical difficulties. I'll tell you, when you think about investing, when you think about saving, many times it's practical. We just make it more difficult than it should be. You know, in the Bible, God had to wake people up sometimes. He even had to give a certain guy named Joseph, the king of dreams, he had to give him the ability to read Pharaoh's dream, to say, listen, we got to store up for 7 years because some hard times are coming that'll make you forget those 7 great years that we just had. And thank God they invested and they saved, so they didn't have to be in this situation. It says, I retire on Friday and I haven't saved a dime. Here's your chance to become a legend. So true. Roger, Mitch, I'm sure you guys have both had, Roger and Kent, I'm sure you both had that experience. Somebody comes in and says, hey, buddy, let's see what you can do. I heard about this guy that's great with loaves and fishes. But that's the miracle that we all need sometimes. But in retirement, nobody needs to tell you that you should be saving money and investing money and putting it to the side. Don't need a dream to tell you famine's coming. I'll tell you all in this room, I'm not an interpreter of dreams, but famine's coming. It always comes. How many times you read in the Bible that they were in a series of drought or famine? Over and over it happens. The last time it happened in this valley was 2007 through 2011. Many, many people were affected by it. But I know a bunch of people who loved those years. And if they could happen again tomorrow, they would love it to happen. Because they could buy up houses for 50 cents on the dollar. They can get stock. When the stock market fell in 2008, some people loved it. Warren Buffett has a saying that says, when people get fearful, get greedy. That's what Warren Buffett says, and he's a pretty smart guy. One of the richest men in the world. And I will tell you, that's what you get the opportunity to do that when you have a pattern of investing. You have a pattern of investing and you have a system. You understand that I'm going to invest when things are down more when they're up. But I'm going to be consistent all the time. Be consistent. These guys will talk about that a little tonight. I'm not the expert when it comes to investing. I work with these guys myself. Roger's company, Madison Pool Investments, is my major financial personal, my major advisor who I work with. I trust these guys. I love them. I've sent many friends, family, and clients to them. They do a fabulous job, and they're wise. His partner, Mitch, is my next-door neighbor. Ironically, and I love him, but 41 years he's been a financial advisor. He's equally as good looking, if not better looking, and I like that guy a lot. We have a lot in common. Kent Owens, I've known a long time. Many of you would know him as Jesus in our church play. He's obviously a very sharp guy. Anybody that knows Kent knows that. And I worked with Kent before when he was at Thrivent. Maybe he could talk about that when he's up here a little bit. But he made a move to Tree City Advisors. He's learned a better way. He's talked to me about it. I understand his concepts, and I like the things he learned from being at one way of doing business and mainly selling insurance and mainly selling certain products to seeing maybe there's a better way. And I know he was resolute in his beliefs before. I know I actually bought an insurance policy from Kent. But this is a perfect reason why this class is here, why we're here. We're learning the truth. And there's different ways. There's different opinions. There's different ways to get to our result. There's not exactly one way. In this class tonight, I hope that you dissect what you're going to hear, because I'm not saying I align perfectly with every opinion these guys are going to give. But be able to dissect the difference between what is true and what is not. And by doing that, you're understanding that there's different ways to achieve a goal. Now, I align with these guys or I wouldn't have them here. I'm just saying they have opinions on how to do things. They're going to be contrary to maybe Dave Ramsey. And I always go back to Dave Ramsey, because Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman are the two most opinionated people on the planet. And they teach a way that is this way or no way. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people like Robert Kiyosaki. Has anybody ever heard of Robert Kiyosaki? That's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, if you haven't known that. And the guy is very opinionated. He will belittle you if you don't leverage everything you have. Doug Andrews is another one of those guys. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong either way, but they're different opinions. I want to see what God says about this, though. That's the most important opinion. That's the most important place to get any information. Let's go to Matthew 25, 14 through 30. And we all know this story. This is the story of the talents, of the bags of gold. And when we look at these verses, we understand that God is talking about talents. Now, in English, we use the word talent as what we do, what we're good at. But this is referring to money. Okay, it's a form of money. In my notes here, that where I got this information, I could give it to you, but it says that a talent was worth these 5 talents, the 2 talents, the 1 talent. To understand what a talent was worth about 20 years of a day laborer's wage. So each talent was about 20 years of a day laborer's wage. So 5 talents, that's some money. Talking about God handed out some money here, some decent, this owner handed out a great deal of money to these guys. This wasn't some just, here's a coin, see what you can do with it. So it says again, you'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another he gave 2 bags, another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man had received 5 bags of gold, went at once and put his money at work and gained 5 more bags. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled the accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold, he came and said, Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one with 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will be they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. and throw the worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, we can learn a lot from this. We have an hour and a half, and two guys need to speak that are better than me. So I'm not going to go through all the things this can apply to. But obviously, this has a whole lot to do with our salvation. This is a story about money, but it's really about what God has entrusted to us. And I love where the King James and the different versions that use the word talent, and I love that that word translates into English, that it's our abilities. Because often we talk too much about money. And I think God wants us to use our abilities. When Wayne asked me to do this class, I wasn't quite ready. I'm still working on my book. I wasn't ready with the material I wanted. But again, God hit me and said, I want you right where you're at. I want your abilities. And I want to just be obedient. And everything I do, I pray that God uses me all the time. And then when he shows up and asks me to, I'm often like, not that. That's not what I meant. Right? I don't know if you've ever been there. But if I'm honest, I ask God to bring people into my life. And there's different people he brings into my life. I'm often like, not them. I think you meant somebody else. But you know, the point is we need to be using our talents. I don't want to stand before the King of Kings and him say, you didn't use what I gave you. And you didn't use it for me. And that comes to our money too. So this can be applied to many things, but in our finances, we need to be using our finances and doing something with it. If not, we don't want to stand before the Lord and be like, I'm just the guy that buried it because you're a harsh master. So we got to understand that what we're entrusted, we must put to use and put to work in God's kingdom. We're going to cover this in detail in the last week when we get into legacy. God demands that we use what he has given us. Because just as Wayne talked last week, everything is his. The world and the fullness thereof, everything is his. None of it's ours. We are his stewards. And that word is a powerful word. And I want you to take to another scripture here, and I want to talk about diversity and diversifying our assets. Because tonight we're going to talk about different investments, and I need you to understand how diversifying comes into play. In Ecclesiastes 11, 1 and 2, says, ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures. Yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. See, famine's coming. Hard times are coming. Now, if you've been living in this world very long, you can see the stock market has had a pretty good spike to it for a decade. The housing market has been right there with it. Those two indexes don't necessarily have a correlation. They're what we call non-correlated assets. They're not tied together. But they can be. The market and the economy is going crazy. 2 years ago, we had this little thing called COVID. You guys ever heard of that? In this church, for the first 2 months, it was called Corvid. That guy that's better looking than me that stood up here last week, he couldn't get Corvid out of his mouth. I loved when he would say that. It would crack me up every time. Corvid 17 or whatever he would call it. Oh, I love you, Wayne. But the thing is, he got it down, that COVID thing hit. And if anybody in their right mind, the March of 2 years ago, the stock market did a little dip. Anybody remember those days? For 4 or 5 days, well, it lost about 25%. And it started coming back, obviously. Now, believe it or not, by July, most accounts were back, and by the end of the year, they were up. And then this last year, obviously amazing returns in the market and the housing market. Now, if somebody would have told all of us that our government's going to throw $10 trillion, that's a lot of zeros if I put them up there, into our economy, we all would have probably saw, hey, maybe things are going to be all right for a while. But I don't think anybody in here has to be a prophet to see that one day there's going to be an account for the things that we do. But we know this, good or bad or ugly, no matter what you believe, no matter what your economist will tell you, the Bible is clear that days of disaster may come upon us. They come upon us. They do. It doesn't have to be the economy. Tomorrow you could find out you have cancer. Tomorrow you could find out that one of your kids are sick. Fill in the blank. Things change in a heartbeat. I just heard about a young pastor that died, talking to Rich and Karma before here. And his son, who's part of the church, is 42 years old, 46 years old. He just passed away, and he had no life insurance. And they just had the funeral talking about how he's not protected at all. The church didn't buy a policy. He didn't have a policy. He's 46 years old, leaves behind a beautiful family, and he has no life insurance. That breaks my heart. And when you look at the world around you, disaster may come upon the land. So we need to diversify. I'm not going to take any more time up. I want to introduce our next speaker and get him up here so you guys can hear his wisdom. Again, I love this guy. He's a one of a kind, and I mean that. I don't just toot his own horn because he's, I don't need to give him a big head. But I love Roger Madison. He owns Madison Pool Investments. He's been an advisor for decades. His partner, again, Mitch, has been an advisor, I know, for 41 years. These two guys are wise. They get finances at a high level. They get investing and retirement and legacy, all of what this class is about, they get. I'll introduce Kent after Roger's done because I owe him for the grapes. Roger, Madison.
Thanks, man. Well, thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. I want to thank Shain and also Wayne. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you for a few minutes tonight, and I've gotten to know Wayne and the Crown Overs and just really appreciate them and the way they conduct themselves. It's good to be with you. I want to talk just for a minute about talents. It's my favorite scripture in the New Testament. And as I think about talents, one of the things that we've taught our children over the years is this concept of talents. And I would just add one thing that what Shain said, or maybe just emphasize something. I've shared with my kids over the years that you've been blessed with certain talents and abilities, certain things that you can go out and do. And you will be held accountable at that judgment seat. You're going to be held accountable when you sit down with the Lord. He's going to say, you were blessed with certain things. And what did you do with those things? And I'm convinced of that. And I think that more than anything else, what the Lord's going to ask us is, what do we do with our time? I blessed you with an ability to go out and help people, to strengthen people, to love people, to build people. And he's going to ask us, did we do that? And so as we think about the talents that we've all been blessed with, those certain abilities, those innate abilities that come to us, and we're all different, which is great. I would just encourage you to think about what talents do you have and what ability do you have to go out and bless your neighbor, bless a family member, bless, heaven forbid, somebody that you really can't stand. If you're a Republican, go bless a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, go bless a Republican. I mean, let's go all out, right? But if we think about that and the importance of blessing lives with those talents, especially with our time, I think that's something we can do that would really bless others, and I think the Lord would be pleased with that effort. So I just share that with you. I want to share with you a quick story about Valentine's Day. Story about a young kid, starting to get into that dating, phase of life. And he's got a girl at school that he really likes. Boy, she's cute. And he's pretty excited about this. And he gets the courage to ask her out on a date for Valentine's. And he's thinking, I really want this to go well. And in fact, I really hope this ends with a kiss. So he goes over to the candy store and he walks in there and he says, "Mister, I've got a really hot date coming up here on Valentine's Day. And she's really attractive, really, really cute girl. And I'm really hoping that at the end of the night, I could get a kiss." And he says, "I think if I take her a big box of chocolates, that I can improve my chances." And the candy store owner says, "Well, man, that sounds like a good plan. Good for you." He says, "I've got this box over here. It's got everything that a young woman would want. I would suggest that one." And he says, "Great, I'll take it." He buys the chocolate. Later on that night, the kid, he goes home and he gets all cleaned up and he showers and he puts on his cologne and borrows Dad's car. And, he's pretty excited about this date. He shows up to pick his date up and as is typical, the young woman's not quite ready yet. And so Mom and Dad open up the door and they said, "Why don't you come on in and have a seat for a minute while she's getting ready?" And so he does that, and she comes downstairs And she says, are you ready to go? And he says, no, I think before we leave, we ought to say a prayer together with your family. And she's thinking, well, this is kind of strange. So they have a quick prayer, and she says, well, should we go now? And he says, no, I'd like to read a couple of scriptures out of the Bible. So they open up the Bible, and they start reading the Bible, and she's looking at him like, what are you doing? And she's kind of like perturbed and thinking, man, I've got this religious fanatic here that I'm going on a date with tonight. What's happening? Finally, she says, look, we're out of here. We're going. So they go, and they get out in the car. They sit in the car, and she says, what got into you? I didn't realize you're so religious. And he says, well, I'm not, but I didn't realize your dad owned a candy store until a few minutes ago. So sometimes repentance happens whenever we need it to, and certainly that's a good example of that there. Well, let's go ahead. We'll get started. I think they've got some slides for me up there, if they're ready to roll, and we'll get into this presentation. And I'm watching the clock. It's about 7:20 when I started, so I'll make sure I'm done at 7:50. Are we okay up there? Maybe. There we go. Perfect. I'm going to talk to you tonight about buckets of money and how we approach that. When you hear about investing, you hear a lot of people that talk about this. And again, you've heard that my name's Roger Madison. I'm a registered investment advisor, representative with One America Securities. This next screen is just my disclaimer. And basically what it tells you is that there's risk in investing. And I think everybody probably understands that. We'll skip past that one, thanks. So let's get into this. First, talk a little bit about mountain climbing. This is a conversation we have with a lot of our clients because it's important for people to understand really where your risk is in investing. And we have a conversation a lot about where's the risk in mountain climbing. And some people aren't aware of this, but if you study those that have climbed Mount Everest as an example, since 1921, there's been about 300 deaths of people that have climbed Everest. And 72% of those have actually happened on the descent. They've happened after people have either gotten to base camp and have began the descent down, or actually ascended the top of the mountain and have come down. And we talk about that a lot in investing as well. I think Kent would agree with this. It's probably not too difficult for most of us to help you grow your money. But the truth is that when you get to a point when it's time to start distributing what you've saved, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and it takes a little bit more expertise. Shain mentioned Dave Ramsey. I don't necessarily have anything against Dave. I think that he throws numbers out sometimes that are a little bit not backed. Let's just call it that. He's a little bit flippant, I think, sometimes. He's great on debt management. He's great on those kind of things. When it comes to investing, his advice is kind of a cookie cutter approach oftentimes. And I think what needs to be remembered is that when you get into the point when it's time to start spending what you saved, I think you have to be a little bit more careful. And I think using the services of somebody like ourselves or somebody like a Kent, it becomes pretty critical because coming down the mountain, the financial mountain, can be more difficult. If you can go to the next slide, please. We use this a lot. We call it our savings hook. And it's really just a diagram to show you that there's two phases in your life. And hopefully all of you grabbed the handouts there. And I apologize. I wish I would have made those so small. I'm to the point where I have to have readers now. Most of you probably don't have to do that. But hopefully this will at least give you something to follow on there. So there's really two periods in your life financially. There's the accumulation phase. And certainly that's where I am. That's where Shain is. And then there's that distribution phase. That phase of your life where it's time to start spending, what you've saved. I had a gal in the office today that her husband died here a couple years ago, and she inherited his IRA money, and there was some life insurance there. And she's at that point now where she's in distribution mode. And she came in today to say, I want to remodel my house. I need $30,000. Where do I take that from? Where's the best place to take $30,000? And so we went through her different accounts and we talked about that, talked about what's happening in the market right now, and helped her identify where do you take that from. She's in distribution phase. Me, I'm in accumulation phase. I got 12 years before I'm going to retire. And so I'm just trying to save it as fast as I can. I'm trying to grow it as much as possible. I'm taking as much risk as I possibly can. in most of my accounts because I don't need the money right now. So let the market do its thing. Just let it work. And so there's really two phases that you have to think about as you think about your financial time frame. Most of us start working at about 18 years old. We work to about 65. I don't want to depress anybody here, but you do the math on this. If I start working at even let's say 20, and I go to 65, that's 45 years of work. Life expectancy is about 82. That's only 17 years of retirement. That's why the accumulation line is longer than the distribution line. So the idea is let's bring that distribution line down. Let's start that a little sooner if we can, right? And hopefully you live long enough to enjoy some of that. Next slide, please. So we talk about 4 buckets of money, and we keep it pretty simple. There's a guaranteed income bucket, a safe money bucket, a liquid growth, and then protection and legacy. And I'm going to get into each one of those here for a minute. Go ahead, please. So the first one is this guaranteed income bucket. And we like to think of it kind of like popcorn at the movie theater, right? It's just comfortable. You know it's there. You kind of know what you're going to get. We want it to be pretty simple. The idea here is that we want to meet your basic needs with some kind of guaranteed income. Some of you might work for a public utility. You might have a pension plan. Some of you might work for, or maybe you work for HP or IBM, or maybe you work for the state, a teacher or an administrative role, maybe a county or a state job, and you've got a pension plan. That's great. That can cover your guaranteed income. But what we try to do is help people understand, and I think it's important for you to understand, where is your need for basic, consistent, steady income, regardless of what the market's doing. Market's up, market's down, you don't really care. You just know that every month you need $3,400 to pay the bills. And we want to make sure that that shows up in your checking account every month. No questions asked, no fear, it's there. That's what that guaranteed income money does. It needs to be consistent, and it needs to just cover those basics. Now, everybody's definition of basic is different, right? Some people want to focus in on just utilities, make sure I can pay my property taxes, make sure I can cover my health insurance or my Medicare supplement, whatever that might be. Other people, a basic to them is I want to travel every year. And so I need a certain amount of money that I can travel with and go do the things that I want to do. It's really up to you deciding what that is. We feel like it's a good idea to have a guaranteed income bucket that you know is going to show up every month and meet those needs. Okay, next slide, please. Your safe money tool is just that. We want this to be something that no matter what happens in the market, it does not lose money. And no matter what happens, every time you get a statement, you at least made something. So this is a big part of what we do, and we think it's a good thing to have in your overall portfolio. We don't want there to be stock or bond risk in this safe money bucket. It cannot have a fee. It's got to be free of fees, because if you're paying a fee and you have a year where it doesn't earn much, then you're going to get a statement that says, hey, you lost money this year. So we want you literally, every time you get a statement, to be able to say, I at least made something. It may only be 1% in that given year, but at least you made something that year. We want that to be tax deferred. We don't want you to have to pay taxes on money you're not spending. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about, is we try to get people into the mode of, if you're not going to spend that dollar, why do we want to give the government a portion of it? We'd rather wait until you're actually spending it to pay the taxes. That discussion I had with Tammy this morning was based upon that. Okay, you need $30,000. Where do we want to take that from? Let's look at where we've already paid some taxes, and let's go ahead and harvest that. If we can, let's avoid paying taxes if we don't need to. And oh, by the way, we just came through a rough 6 weeks in the market. And so maybe the safe money tool is the best place to take that money from. So that's why we like having these different buckets. It gives us flexibility. We usually use, in this kind of a contract, a fixed or an indexed annuity contract. Again, no fee, and has to have a floor that there cannot be any loss. And we want that to be at least 10% available every year, because you need some liquidity, right? You've got to be liquid in your money, because life happens, right? We all have plans, but life happens while we're making our plans, right? And there's detours along the way. We got to be ready for those detours. So we need to have at least 10% of that available. Let's go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. Our liquid growth bucket is just that, and we usually divide this into two. We have what we refer to as the slow bucket, the slow go, and then we have the go-go, which is the more advanced, more risk. This has to be 100% liquid to you. It's got to be available at any time that you need it. There can't be no encumbrances, no, hey, if I need to get out of it in a year or 5 years, I get a penalty. No, it's got to be 100% liquid. We usually divide it into the two, like I said. One of them, more conservative, safer, still going to have some risk, still going to see some ups and downs, but generally going to be a safer, slower ride. The other piece, more aggressive. Let the market work for you. The market goes up 80% of the time. We understand that. We want those monies to be liquid. We like those accounts. They're great. But the last 4 weeks, they haven't been so good. So you've got to have some alternatives of places you can go because you may have a need. Something can come up. You're going to need that money. We've got to have a place to get it. With this bucket, we can use a variety of allocations and a variety of tax strategies. So we can tax manage, we can harvest loss. We do a lot of that. Harvest loss today, buy it back in 60 days. There's all kinds of things we can do to help you from a tax perspective. It can be taxable each year. You get a 1099, or it can be money that you put into some kind of an IRA, a Roth, or a traditional. But it's got to be liquid. It's got to be available for you because many times in your life, you're going to get surprises. What we really like about this, and Shain brought it up, last year we had a great year, and the year before, in March, we had a rough 4 weeks there. These kind of accounts give you some flexibility. We were calling our clients in March of 20 saying, this is a once-in-a-lifetime buying opportunity. The market's down 31% in 17 days. Let's get any money you have sitting on the sidelines. Let's get it into the market now because you're going to make money on this in the next period of time. People have done that. And so now the conversation is, okay, you've made 30, 40, 50, in some cases 60% on that money that we moved into that account. How should we use that now? Is now a good time to take money out, to do a remodel, to buy a swim spa, to take a trip, whatever you're going to do? This is where we have the flexibility to do that. Because if you've had a year where you made 10% and you want to go and take that out and use it and spend it, then hallelujah, go for it. Use that and let that money go to work for you. Okay, next one, please. So this last piece, this protection and legacy piece, is something that we think is pretty important. And I experienced this in my own family over the last couple of years. My mother died 3 years ago, and she had been sick with Parkinson's for about 10 years. Never in my life would I have thought that a 56-year-old should buy long-term care insurance. Just wasn't even on my radar. It is now. My wife and I just bought our policy. We both turned 50 here in the last 6 months. And so, as I think about protection, I watched my dad spend down his own assets about $350,000 to care for my mom when she had to go into a care facility. Devastating to them financially. And the reality is that most people that are at risk here are the middle class. If you have a net worth between $500,000 and about $3 million, you really have to pay attention to this slide and decide, what's my plan? I'm not here tonight to tell you that you have to buy long-term care insurance, but I am here to say you need to have a plan for how you're going to address that. Because if you don't, it will wipe you out, and it did my dad. He was just at the wrong level where he had to spend his own money before Medicaid would come in and help. And by the way, if you think that's a great option, Medicaid is not a good way to go. My mother, when they found a bed for her in Nampa, there were 2 beds left that would take memory care at that time. And she fell in that facility and had to go to St. Luke's. She got discharged from St. Luke's on day 29. Had she gone 2 more days, they would have lost the bed in Nampa, and the next available bed was in Twin Falls. My dad, committed father, committed husband, a good man, he just passed away about 6 weeks ago. Every day went and spent every moment with my mom. Can you imagine the challenge of having to go to Twin Falls every day to do that? Because that was the only option. And the reason was because they were Medicaid recipients at that point. Much better to have a plan that says, we have some assets set aside. Shain can help you with that. We can help you with that. Kent can help you with that. Have a plan of what you're going to do there and what that's going to look like, because paying for it privately or using an insurance option is a much more effective way than sitting back and saying, I'm going to let Medicaid dictate to me how I'm going to handle this. It's a big deal. And it really, if you're in that $500,000 to $3 million range, you really need to think through that option. Life insurance. I know there's a lot of discussion about life insurance. This is an area where I completely disagree with Dave Ramsey. I think there's use for whole life insurance. I have a fair amount of it. My wife does. I like the cash value as a safe money alternative when things go nuts. It provides you another emergency fund that you can access. And this is the part where I really struggle with Dave. I've had clients die that are older, that their term insurance has expired. Or they get to the point where they say, I'm 65 years old. Financially, things didn't work just how I thought they were going to. I still owe money on my house. Or I'm worried about if I died, there's not quite enough income for my wife. But they're sick, or term insurance is too expensive at that point. And so, yes, would it be great if we could make every plan work perfectly and not have to have that? Perhaps. But I'd be a little careful about just thinking that your term insurance that's going to go away when you're 60 is going to take care of all of your life insurance needs. That Tammy that I referred to earlier today, her husband came to me in 2005 and said, hey, you know what, I've got a question for you. I'm going to leave this job and I'm going to go to another job, and it's a good opportunity, but they only provide me $300,000 of term coverage. My current job provides $1 million. And I said, well, let me walk you through this a little bit. I said, first of all, I would tell you, take what they give you for free, but I would buy the rest of your coverage outside. And he said, well, I can pay for more there. And he said, why would I not do that? It's cheaper. And I said, you're right, it is cheaper. But the problem is that you don't own the coverage. And they could take that away, or that benefit plan could change, or you may change jobs. Well, fortunately, I convinced him. He listened to me and he said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and I'll buy some additional coverage from you. And then we rolled over some 401k assets and managed that for him. Well, in 2013, he got diagnosed with multiple system atrophy. And if you know anybody that's had that, you understand how terrible that is. It's a cousin to Lou Gehrig's disease, only worse, because mentally you're sharp as a tack, but your brain cannot communicate with the body. So you know what's happening, and there's nothing you can do about it. He survived that for about 7 years. And he had this term insurance that he owned. And it was getting ready to expire in 2018. But it was convertible. So we went in and converted it to whole life insurance, so that when he died in 2019, just 1 year later, his wife, instead of getting zero, got $1 million. And she was able to stay in her house, close to the grandkids, close to all of her friends, close to all of her family, and she has a great lifestyle. And she's very comfortable. And I think sometimes when we talk about blanket statements like, buy term, invest the difference because you'll outsave your problem, I'm just not always sure that that's true. And I think it's important that we just look at a situation in a mirror and say, what's the best thing for me in my own situation? And be careful in some of those decisions that you make. The other thing that's interesting about insurance, I think it's a great way to pass money. I'll just share you one quick story and then I'm going to wrap up. A friend of mine is retired from Boise Cascade, been a client for a long time, and he has about $2.5 million that we manage for him. And he, about 3 years ago, he said to me, I have a question. He said, if I died tomorrow, my $2.5 million how's that going to divide among my kids? I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, do I have it equally? And I said, yeah, you do. He said, okay, well, help me understand something. He said, my oldest son, Scott, is a very, very successful dentist, makes $1 million a year. My youngest daughter, Melanie, is the stay-at-home wife of a school teacher who makes $45,000 a year. He said, if Scott inherits my IRA, he's going to get it was about $600,000. He said, well, how much tax is he going to pay on that? I said, well, he wouldn't take it all in one lump sum, but essentially every year, once he started, he would pay about 45%. And he just was aghast. He thought, you got to be kidding me. He said, well, what about Melanie? And I said, well, Melanie probably, perhaps, would only pay as little as 10%, and maybe even a little less than that, based on the fact that she's got 3 kids. He said, well, that's not fair. Guess what? Life isn't fair, right? He said, well, what's the solution to that? And I said, well, there are several that you could look at. But ultimately what he decided to do, and this is where I think, again, life insurance can be a valuable tool. He set up a plan to take his required distribution out from his IRA and buy a life insurance policy. Scott is the beneficiary of that life insurance policy. He'll inherit that and pay no tax. And by the way, Steve's tax bracket is about 21% between state and federal. So he's half the taxes that Scott will pay. So he's going to take that RMD and buy life insurance, and Scott's the beneficiary of the life insurance. Melanie and her other sister, who's also married to a school principal who makes a little bit more money, they're going to inherit the IRA. They're going to pay less tax, if not equal to what Steve's already paying. So there's an application for life insurance, and that's where, again, I say, look in the mirror and decide what's the right thing to do. I don't think there's a cookie-cutter approach. I think you have to look at these buckets and say, how do these buckets apply to me? Somebody that has a pension plan from the school district that has $3,500 a month, that's probably adequate to meet your basic needs every month. You don't need some kind of a product from me that would provide you guaranteed income. You already have it. So that would be a waste of money for you. You could be more liquid and be more safe because you've already got your guaranteed income met. Now you may say, I want more guaranteed income. Okay, that's a discussion we can have. But each person should take those 4 buckets and say, how do they apply to me as an individual? And then make your best decision. The benefits of the strategy, we're talking about that. Worry-free income to meet your basic needs. Everybody wants to be on the beach, right? Right? Living life large, not worrying, not stressing, right? That's kind of the idea. Higher potential withdrawals. This is a big deal to us. You hear a lot of people talk about safe withdrawal rate. Some people say it's 3.5. Some people say it's 4. Some people say it's 5. I think it depends on who you read from. Our target withdrawal rate for our clients is 7%. And the reason we can do that is because in rough years, like we had in March of 20, we're not going to take money from your liquid growth account. We're going to take distributions from your safe money account. It's not affected by the market. It allows you to take more money from your more aggressive investments when they're doing better. And when they're not doing well, we're going to let them sit and heal and recover, let the market do its thing over time. We don't want to take anything out of the shoulder. We want to think like a dairy farmer. We want to live off the milk. Let that herd of cows just stay in the barn, keep them healthy. Let's live off of the milk that we can generate as much as possible. Potentially, we can create some tax efficiencies for you by using buckets. And then again, a planned approach to your long-term care and perhaps legacy dollars, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Thanks for letting me be here with you tonight. That's all I've got. Hopefully, you've heard something here that's helpful. Thank you for not throwing anything at me if you heard something you didn't like. And I'll wrap up with that.
Thank you so much, Roger. Great stuff. Now, I want to speak to some of that before I have Kent come up. I agree with just about every word. I follow some of that myself. There's different strategies, though, and you're going to hear some different stuff from Kent that I think is great. I also agree with. Again, there's different opinions. I mean, Kent sold me a life insurance policy. It would be 4 years ago next month. It was also that exact same type of policy. It was a term policy that converted. Term is what I needed. I was investing the difference. But I came to a different need in my life where I thought it would be a good idea to fully fund a cash value life policy. Me and Rhonda next month make our last payment that we'll ever make the rest of our lives on that policy. I put in the most money I can in what we call a 7-year period. I won't get into the details of that, but I was trying to keep it under what they call the MEC limit. I didn't want it to be turned into a modified endowment contract. I didn't want it to become taxable. But I'm so thankful that Kent sold me that term policy that gave me that option. Now, not everybody should do that. That's the thing. But for me and Rhonda, it was a good fit. Next month, we pay our last payment on that. Now, our children's children will be blessed. My kids are learning good strategies from us. They'll save money. They'll have their own lives. I plan to hopefully not die until they're old. But even if we do, they'll have a great life insurance policy. If I die, Rhonda's covered, so forth. I like that. Dave Ramsey's advice was opposite of that. That's why I bought term and invested the difference. But I'm thankful that Kent sold me a policy that gave me the ability to choose to move it. Now, we didn't have the tragedy of somebody dying a year later, but I don't know tomorrow any more than any of you do. I know that we aren't even assured today. That's what the word says, right? So the guy that stored up his stuff in his barns, he stored up his barns, and I remember the parable, he comes to Jesus, he uses this parable to say he decided to build another barn to store up all of his stuff. He's like, I got a great idea. I'm just going to store all this up. I'm going to save it. And Jesus said, I tell you, your life will be taken from you this very day. We don't know. So I love these type of strategies that think differently. Now, is Dave Ramsey wrong? If everybody could calculate their life out, know exactly where they're going to live, buy term, invest the difference, he's not wrong. You save fees. Roger Fair? Save fees, that person would win every time. Sure. If life always worked like that, he forgets the asterisks. And we need to understand there's asterisks. Kent's going to talk annuities and life insurance. There's other ways to still insure and protect yourselves. There's more than one way. That's what I love about it. Now, I want to invite Kent up, and I know he's going to talk some. I wanted to also highlight on something Roger talked about that's in your notes. It's called a buffer asset. You've heard that term before in this class, but he talked about the volatility of markets and having that place to get money. That term is called a buffer asset. Understand that you need to have a place to get money when the markets aren't doing what you expect them to do. This is the death of most people's up-the-hill strategy. They go up the hill and they get scared. In March of 2 years ago, what do? They buy low and sell high? No, they buy high and sell low. They're like, oh man, I can't lose this money, so they sell it. Anybody that sold stock 2 years ago is kicking themselves today. And all they needed was a place called a buffer asset to go get money that wasn't subject to the same up and down. We talked about reverse mortgages last week. That can be one. But life insurance can be one. There's other ways. There's other buckets of money that you can use. But you need to have a bucket of money that doesn't do this. That buffer asset is the key to not only going up the hill. We're going to talk about this more next week. It's more important going down. When you first retire, that first 5 years before retirement, and that first 5 years in retirement, that 10-year window, you don't have a good buffer asset, you might as well take a match and light that on fire because your chance of success goes way down. Am I wrong, guys? Because those 5 years before retirement and that 5 years first in retirements, I can show you lots of smart guys. It's great research can show you how important it is that you have a place to go get money. Because if you had a March event of 2 years ago and you just retired, you're scared to death because you just lost 31% of your portfolio in 17 days. And this is how math works. Let's just take an easy number. Let's say you had $100 and you lose 30%. How much money do you have left? $70. What kind of percent does it take to get back to $100? Not 30%. See, even if the market goes right back to where it was, guess what I'm going to be at? I'm going to be at, that's $21. I'm going to be at $91. It's going to take 42% for me to get back to where I was. Now, if that doesn't blow your ever-loving mind, you got to understand that you better have a good buffer. Now, I'm going to leave this last half hour for Kent, and then I want you guys to have the ability to ask questions. Now, I've been in rooms like this many, many times. I've taught classes, and I do presentations. Usually not this many people, but I do them. And very rarely does somebody want to ask a question in front of a group because they're like, my question's dumb, and I don't want people to know. And so I'm going to wait and ask it later. And then you catch us back there and you ask the question. That's okay if that's what you need to do, especially if it's private. But I would encourage you to ask questions. Here's why. Somebody else may feel that they're dumb and your answer will help them. So let's take care of each other. Some people in here have real life examples that will help somebody that just doesn't have the gumption to ask. And maybe they didn't even think about that. But good questions help people understand the truth. That's the problem. I was told by, again, I don't want to beat up on him all the time, but we'll just call him, instead of Dave, I'll call him Bave, whatever, change the name. From Dave, he told me some stuff that I did that I look back at my life and say, man, there was something I should have looked more into. I should have went and looked it up. And instead, I took his advice. I didn't even question it. Now, how stupid is that? We do that all the time. When Wayne preaches, I love him. But when Rhonda takes notes, because I'm not going to lie to you, I've never taken notes. That's not me. I haven't taken notes in my whole life in class or anything. But I like to take them, and I like to look up what Wayne's talked about. I like to see. Rhonda taught me that. She's been going through a series and a book on that. I like to see, is what this person just spent an hour and a half teaching me about true? Does anybody else do that? I don't want to take it hook, line, and sinker. You know why? Because Jesus said don't do it. He said it's written, go look it up. Paul said it's written, go look it up. They were preaching and saying, go check for yourself. This is what it says. So tonight, when you're done, you take Roger Madison and you take Kent Owens and you take what they talked about and you go look it up. You do some research, okay? And if you have questions, I'm not saying they're saying one thing that's not true, but it doesn't mean that it's true 100% for you. You understand? Okay. Kent Owens, I love this guy. This guy is a one of a kind. If you know him, you know that. He's 100% in. He's the only person I know that could come up in that suit and probably break dance for us right here. I told him this time when he comes up on stage, we're not going to crucify him. That was his joke. But I love this guy. He's honest. He's a Christian. He's a good guy. Down in his heart, he's hungry. He's young. He dresses like a GQ model, looks a little bit like one. I used to tell people when they would come to our church play, I would say, come see good-looking Jesus. And I invite all the ladies in my office. And one lady actually came and she caught me in the foyer when we were done. And she said, you did not false advertise. I said, yeah, I wouldn't do that to you. So I want to invite my good friend from Tree City Advisors, Kent Owens, up. Come give us a good talk today.
I'm pushing 40, so it's more breaking than dancing nowadays. Goodness sakes. Well, thanks, Shain. I really appreciate being here. I love this place. I love this room. My 5-year-old daughter was dedicated to Jesus right here by that man. So I love this. He married us. So love you, Pastor Wayne, and love 99% of the people in here. The other 1%, I just don't know you. So I would love you too. But my name's Kent Owens. I've been doing this about 9 years now, and I started on the insurance side, and I still believe a lot in insurance, and good advisors are good for everybody. So I work with a lot of other advisors in town, work really close with estate attorneys. We have 2 estate attorneys that are basically in-house, really close with the CPAs, because all of that is so important. I would say if I have a superpower, it's having the ability to surround myself with people a lot smarter than I am, and I'd include Shain in on that, and I'm really lucky with the team I have. If this information is good, if you want to hear even better information, Nick Daniels, he's one of my colleagues, and he has a podcast through our company. It's The Real Money Pros, and you might have heard us on 670 KBOI, but we have a consistent podcast that Nick puts out there, and he's a former pastor. So he has this gift of taking these complex situations and breaking it down into easy terms for everybody to understand. So he does it because he's the best at it on our team. Again, I like insurance. I believe in it. I came to a place with my career where there was just a dissonance. There's a disconnect. And really, that was a conflict of interest. And so I personally wanted to choose to not do insurance anymore. I mean, my dad passed when I was 11 years old. He was 42. He had a heart attack while flying as a crop duster. And my mom is okay because of insurance. And so I absolutely believe in that. I give advice on it. But just for a quick example, and today I really want to equip you with some good questions to ask when you're working with a financial professional. Here's some really good questions. And what are your options? How do you know how to analyze what's being told to you, what's being advised to you, so you know that's a good option for you? And so with that, I analyzed for myself too, and I wanted to remove myself from this conflict of interest, and I wanted to enter into the world of being a pure fiduciary. And so fiduciary is thrown around a lot in our industry, and if you ask an advisor, are you a fiduciary? A lot of times they'll say, yes, I am. And if they were giving you advice on your 401k, then yes, legally they are. But there's what's called changing of the hats. And this is what I didn't like, and this is where insurance isn't bad, but I didn't like that when I sold insurance, I changed my hat. I went from, okay, I'm giving fiduciary advice, which in legal terms is giving what is the best interest for the client. And so that is what is in the best interest for you, for your specific plan. And then there's the changing of the hats. So if I make a commission on something, now it is suitable. So if it's suitable for you, if it puts you in a better position, but then I make a lot more money, then it's still good in legal terms. So I removed myself from that. And it made it easier, and I did take a 70% pay cut when I did it. So I still, years at Tree City Advisor, I still make significantly less than I did before. And that's because of the commissions. So for an example, if a client was putting $10,000 a year into a permanent cash value life insurance policy, I would make anywhere between $5,000 to $7,000 on that one policy. If a client now works with me and puts $10,000 a year into the investments in one of our portfolios, I make $100 for our firm. And so that's a big difference, $100 versus $7,000. So I would ask when you're getting advice, what are you getting paid? And that is a very fair question to ask an advisor. What do you get paid on this? What are all of my options? And can you show me the math on all of my options? And then what are you getting paid? And if they do a dance around and say, well, you pay the insurance company and then the insurance company paid me, not a good answer. Don't take that answer. If they say, well, I get paid by referrals and clients giving me, a good thumbs up to some other people, not a good answer as well. Give me the dollar amount. I really like the math. So these are good questions that you can ask the advisors when you're working with. How do you get paid on this? And so But again, and there's nothing wrong if they get paid more. There's nothing wrong with making a commission. There's term insurance is great. Permanent insurance can be really great as well. Long-term insurance is absolutely needed and I really liked the segments of that 500,000 to 3 million. I typically use the 1 million to 3 million, but I think he nailed it right there. And that is, what are the statistics? If you're over 65 years old, there's an 80% chance that you'll use some form of extended care. That's a big deal. State of Washington just forced everybody into it. We think Oregon's probably next, and then Idaho will happen someday. And so then even in the private world for that long-term care, they can't even sell it in Washington anymore. And these insurance companies are saying, hey, our risk is maxed out. You are not allowed to sell another private long-term care policy anymore. So I would say that if that is something, again, I don't sell long-term care insurance, but I advise on it all the time because it is important, it's needed. There's a big commission on it, and who cares? But it's important to know if there is that conflict. So even though there's a conflict of interest, that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's giving you bad advice. So I kind of want you to know both sides of this, of why I decided to operate in this sense, but it's not a bad thing to operate on the other sense. Otherwise, you would have these good policies and these good products that just wouldn't be available because nobody could sell them to you. So we do have a bucket system as well. At Tree City Advisors, we really focus heavily on the planning. So we break it down, and we start with goals-based planning. And I had a presentation, but somehow it didn't transfer, but that's okay. I'll talk to try to really explain to things and give you a picture in your mind, and if you want some diagrams, you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to send that over to you. But when we approach planning, we have, we start with a balloon. Balloons expand, and they contract. And your life and your goals will expand, and they'll contract. Right now, I have a 5-year-old daughter. She's absolutely beautiful. She goes to Coal Valley Christian, which is amazing, and my budget has expanded with Coal Valley. When she turns 18, that's going to expand even more. So with some college planning, and then someday, I hope she marries somebody that's a lot better than her dad, and so that wedding is going to expand even more. And then she'll be off, and she'll leave and cleave. She'll be on her own. And then that part of my goals will contract. But then my retirement goals will expand. So that goals-based planning is really good in understanding the math that is behind that goal. And then this is a really key difference of our approach that is different. So our bucket-based approach is based on a timeline. So we use 3 main buckets, and we really educate people that time determines the risk. So I really like the picture of Mount Everest, and absolutely, if you're climbing Mount Everest, and if you see the stock market and what it's done the last 5 days, and the year to date, even what it did today. Did anybody look to see what the stock market did today? So California, News Talk 580, 1059 KMJ, they reached out to me today, and they said, Kent, will you come on our radio and just give us a rundown? What in the world happened to the stock market today? Because the central bank released their meeting notes, their minutes this morning. And so right now, there's always a theme in the market. So we've heard the inflation theme for a long time. We've heard transitory, which I don't know how you can use a word that means short-term for over 1.5 years, and that's transitory. But finally, they retired that term a few months ago. But we have a problem. Inflation is sky high at 7.5%. It's the highest it's been in 40 years. And so the Feds released their minutes, and that's a big deal. The market is always trying to guess of what the future is going to happen. So it's baking the future into the price of the market right now. And when I say the market, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the NASDAQ, the broad-based market. And so those minutes came out, and they were pretty hawkish. And hawkish, when you hear that term, that means they're aggressive. So the federal chair, Jerome Powell, he's been a pretty dovish, meaning he's pretty soft and slow to move, except December of 2018, the S&P did drop by 20%, and it was a quick V recovery because he moved on raising interest rates a little too fast. So we learned from that, and the market has baked that in because now they're saying, okay, we're pricing in the market, so which is the smart money, the institutional investors are pricing in the market of what they think the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, is going to do with rising interest rates. And so now these analysts do believe, after the Fed minutes today, that even though they're hawkish, that the market is pricing in 7.25% increases over the next year. So that's 1.75% over the next year of rising interest rates. And you're like, well, how does that affect me? Why does that affect the stock market? Well, a lot of these companies and the easy money policies are incentivized tax-wise to take a lot of loans and leverage to run their businesses. And a lot of growth companies are very leveraged. And when a company and a business is leveraged, it's not like you and me having a mortgage that's a 30-year fixed rate. It is a variable rate. And when their loans on their millions or billions of dollars that they're leveraged goes up by 1.75%, what does that do to their profits? It's not that great, except Bezos, I don't know how Amazon, where they came out with their corporate earnings and they're like, well, due to increased in inflation at 7.5%, we're going to have to increase our prices significantly. And we had record-breaking earnings again, and all of our income just increased some more. But we're gonna raise this just so we can keep our profits and our income just as high. So. Doesn't affect everybody, but it does push all of that up. So the market this morning, minutes came out, stock market just dropped like a rock. So it was going down and going down fast, and again, and then later this afternoon, economic data came out. So the jobs report was positive, more corporate earnings, and retail sales. So what did that tell us? That told us that our GDP, our gross domestic product, which 70% of the GDP is based on consumer spending. So if our consumer spending keeps increasing, that's saying, okay, that increasing in our economy supports the feds to raise interest rates, and we're gonna be okay. Because rising interest rates really isn't that bad, and inflation really isn't that bad as long as the GDP goes up with it. What is bad is stagflation. Stagflation is when inflation keeps going up and GDP, your economy, drops. So stagflation is what we want to avoid. Market is going to be pretty volatile this quarter and next quarter as they start raising those interest rates and really putting that in. But a lot of that's been priced in already. So again, going back to the buckets, time determines the risk. If you need income right now and you have your money in the S&P 500, that is a terrible place to be, right? So it's very volatile. Even today, it went down significantly, and then the S&P ended in the green, and now the futures for tomorrow, it's back in the red. But there can be a lot of volatility even in a day. And so what I like about Rogers is really the goal is not to be forced to sell a position in a down market. So Roger uses buffer assets. I use a different approach. And so I'll tell you about our approach. That bucket one is a time base for 0 to 3 years. That is a hard bucket to plan for as a financial advisor. When you have interest rates that you put your money in a CD and the end of the year they give you a gumball. I mean, I don't even think they give you real money anymore. It's just, thanks for doing business with us. Here's your gumball, and you know what? We might increase it. You'll get a lollipop next time. So interest rates are terrible for that 0 to 3 years. It's hard. We have been really lucky to partner with a hedge fund profit score. And so I've been working with them for months, analyzing it. They had only been accessible through institutional investors. And so I heard about them through a client and friend of mine that owns a cybersecurity company. And so he was looking at holding some money over in that company, and he has some other friends that were. And so he was explaining to me on, because sometimes I learn just as much from my clients as they learn from me. But guess what their account minimum was? $10 million. So, oh my goodness. So finally, somebody has a way to solve this problem for this 0 to 3 year bucket, and I have to tell them they have to have $10 million to invest with it? Forget it. Then I had a friend call me as the CFO of a company, and he's like, Kent, what do I do with this money? I was like, oh my gosh, here goes the same question again. They're like, well, we don't really need it for anything. But we really don't want to lose money on it, and we might want it for future projects in about 5 or so years. And I was like, well, how much is it? And he's like, it's $15 million. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know, I've heard of it, I got it. And so I asked for a personal introduction. We got an introduction to him. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met with. I mean, you're talking about PhDs in quantitative data analysts, and so they're actively trading high yield bonds and their intellectual property on doing that. But what they've allowed us to do is to partner with them and remove the minimum on it. And so it keeps the fees low. There's no surrender charges or anything like that. Even in 2008, they gained over 2%. In 2008. In the last about 15 years, they had 1 year that was negative. And so they do a phenomenal job. That's a lot of what we use for that 0 to 3 year time bucket. That second one is that income bucket. And so that income bucket, again, like Roger said, that's, you think that bucket one was hard, because usually I just said there is no option, just keep it in your bank. Interest rates are terrible, sorry, deal with it. But that income bucket, that gets tricky. Planning has to be involved to solve for the income bucket. And I do love the approach on taking your Social Security, what pensions do you have, what's that income gap? So taking a mathematical approach of what do you need for income. What we do to utilize that is we work with a lot of clients that have rental properties, and I think rental properties are great. Rental properties are tough right now. Cap rates are not good on a new property that you buy for rental properties. You can probably attest to that. In this valley, I have some clients going to North Carolina that are finding a decent cap rate. Some are going with commercial real estate, but that adds another level of risk with commercial real estate. And you've got to have a sophistication level to access that style of investing as well. And so we utilize, and in the tools and the purpose of these investments for that second bucket, that income bucket, is to act very similar as a rental property. To where if you own a house for income, you're probably not checking Zillow every single day to see, what is my house worth? What is Zillow telling me that my house is worth today? What you care about is that house paying me income every single month. Is that renter paying me income every single month? I really don't care. Cool, the house is worth more. I could sell it. But is that person paying me to pay my bills every month? And then you set aside some more money in that bucket one in that 0 to 3 years as your own insurance to pay for anything you need to fix on that house. But we use, and I would write this down, we use a more yield-based approach. And so if you look up like the dividend aristocrats, so you start there. These are companies that have paid a dividend for 10, 20, 30 years consistently. And those prices go up and those prices go down. And Exxon is a great example. It's a volatile company, but they have an 8% yield. And now I want you to picture a teeter-totter. And I'm going to talk to you about preferred stocks. And so preferred stocks are a little bit harder. We work with TD Ameritrade, and so they really send us a list every time these preferred stocks are issued. Anyone issues one, we get that list. We analyze it quick. And so here you have this teeter-totter. and say you have this par value in the middle, and this company's preferred stock is at $100 a share, and it's kicking out a 6% yield. Well, that company's stock goes down, so it pushes that teeter-totter down on this side, and say it goes down to $80 a share. So if you're looking at your portfolio, you go from $100 to $80, but what happens is it pushes that teeter-totter on the other side up. So then your yield that's being kicked out is now 6 or 7%. So your payment, your income keeps coming in. A couple things to be aware of with preferred stocks, though. A lot of them, they can be called back. So if you're a self-investor, that's great, but keep a close eye on that, on those preferred stocks, because if that price goes up, so say that $100 now goes up to $120, well, that company's going to say, forget that, I'm going to buy that stock right back at $100, and I'm going to take that profit. And you don't get that profit. So we have to keep a close eye on that, because if that stock price, and it's callable, and it goes up to $120, and we need to sell it. We need to sell it now and rebuy another one, so then you get the gains, plus then you replace the yield for the income. So preferred apartment communities has just been an incredible one in our portfolio that we've used for that preferred stock on apartment housing. And so that's been great. What I also like about that, and then utilizing it in a non-qualified account, meaning that it's not an IRA or even a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs would be great too. But if it's in a non-qualified account, and say you have a lot of gains built up in that too, well, that's where a non-qualified account can act very similar to some of the tax benefits as a life insurance policy. So instead of, for me, selling a life insurance policy, we use these non-qualified accounts, and we do a lot of Roth conversions. So, March of last year, oh my goodness, we were on the phone too significantly. It is a buying opportunity, but also, hey, your stocks are down, let's convert that to the Roth, and when it went back up 30%, that was 30% tax-free growth that you just got by converting your IRAs to a Roth IRA, and you paid a lower tax rate. So since we work so close with CPAs, and I mean, I am working on these projects hand in hand with the CPA, and I know exactly to the penny of what I can sell in those positions and what I can do on the IRAs to maximize their Roth IRAs to keep them at a reasonable tax bracket as well. So it is a progressive tax bracket, so it wouldn't affect all the rest, but still, a little jump from 22 to 24%, big jump from 24 to 32% on those tax brackets. Do not want to push into that bracket. But that income is so important, again, to not be forced to sell a position in a down market. Now, when I give advice and I recommend an annuity, it is because there is a mathematical answer and there is an emotional answer, and those can be two completely different answers. And guess which one's correct? Depends on you. I can show you the math. But if you look at that statement and you see, even though your income's coming in consistently and your money's still growing and you're not spending down your money at all, but you can't sleep at night because there's volatility, then I'm going to send you to somebody else. And I'll give you the advice on it. And you might even be paying for me to build that advice for you. But I'll say, hey, you know what? I think for you and your happiness, I don't think this strategy will work well for you. Just with your... so much. I have my AWMA, which is an accredited wealth management advisor, and I'm starting the CFP, and so much of the CFP now is based on behavioral finance. So much of what we do in planning for people specifically is based on your specific behaviors. And the math is easy. The math is not hard. You run the math, but understanding you and your behaviors and what is best for you, it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes process. And then that long-term bucket, so bucket 3, that's 10 years plus down the road. So I'm not going to tell you to put any 10-year bucket, like in the S&P, that's just an easy example, in a time period for 0 to 3 years. Doesn't make sense. It's too volatile. I'm not going to tell you to take 0 to 3 years and put it in the 10-year. That's where annuities are for income. It's for filling that gap. If you want to use an annuity, then fill the gap. If that's money you're not going to touch for 10 years down the road, don't use an annuity. If you have an indexed, and if it's indexed to the S&P 500, and say you have a cap rate at 4%, let's take the last 5 years. So 5 times 4 is 20. So you would have capped out at 20%. What has the S&P 500 done the last 5 years? It's done 90%. So that would have cost you 70% on being capped out. If you don't need it in 10 years, there's not a 10-year time period in history where the S&P 500 has been lower than it has been the previous 10 years. I cannot say the same thing for the NASDAQ, because when the tech boom in the year 2000 was at its all-time high, right? So it was extremely high, and then 30% of the NASDAQ doesn't even exist anymore from the year 2000, because that bubble popped, which is kind of like cryptocurrencies right now, FYI, where some of them stayed and some of them increased significantly, but 30% don't even exist anymore. And then the crash in 2007, 2008. So that 10-year time period, that does break that rule. But for the S&P 500, diversification. That's why we talk about diversification. That's why time determines the risk is so important on doing that. That if it's needed for 10 years, remove the shock absorbers. It doesn't make sense for me to take the shocks off of a Cadillac and put it in a Porsche. Doesn't make sense, right? If somebody buys a Porsche because they want to feel the ride, or Porsche, sorry, I don't know if that offends anybody, but you want to feel the ride. You want to drive to McCall, and you want to feel those corners and feel that ride. It doesn't make sense to put in a big old cushy seat and big old shock absorbers. Remove that, ride the ride, get the gains. Get any bonds out of there, get annuities out of there. Those belong in bucket 2. Something else to be aware of. I said this bonds, and this really pertains to right now. Government bonds for this year, and even the TIPS, the treasury bonds, that is not a flight to safety anymore. Those will very, very more than likely still be negative by the end of this year. We even had BlackRock was in our office, a representative, and that's the largest financial institution in the world. And bonds are 30% of their overall business, government bonds, and they're telling us, hey, we can't be super aggressive, but yeah, you guys are smart to be aggressive on removing those government bonds from your portfolios, because everybody thinks they're going to be negative this year. And it makes sense. This will slightly hurt your brain, and I'm going to get really technical because it still hurts my brain just trying to explain it correctly. But the U.S. government technically has a short position on government bonds. A long position is when you buy a stock and you want it to go up. That's a long position. You're looking for those gains. A short position is if you don't own that stock, but you're betting on that stock to drop, and you're going to make a profit when that stock goes down. So when the U.S. government, they want to issue new debt, and they are making money, they issue a government bond to the primary market. And so they issue that bond at the normal price and it goes to auction. So they auction that off. Well, the U.S. government holds the option to call that bond back whenever they want at whatever the price is. So here's the weird part. So they issue the bond, primary market, goes to secondary market. Then they start these bond buybacks, they mortgage-backed securities, they raise interest rates, which then lowers that bond value, and then guess what? They buy those bonds back. And then they instantly made the money on that short position that they created themselves. It's weird. And when you say we're at $10 trillion in debt, to add to that, we also have the $9 trillion. The Federal Reserve is like, oh, we're just sitting on all this money now that we've been buying $120 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities and government bonds, and now what do we do? So that adds to that, and it adds all to the whole mix, and how does the market add that in, and how much cash is sitting out there, and the cash on the sidelines, which it will all equalize. So I say this because it's fun and it's something you can get nerdy on, but it's not something to be overly fearful of, because that pendulum will keep swinging. And right now we've got an issue, okay? We've got an inflation issue. They're going to raise interest rates. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and then it will equalize. And so then it's you're already starting to see some of the income go up in jobs. So those income will go up, prices will go up, and then everything will equalize with how much money they went into. A good example of how things have equalized on a global level is people have asked how, our dollar has gotten so much weaker. It got weaker today, but over the last couple of years, it hasn't really gotten weaker. The U.S. government has infused so much cash into our economy, but guess what? So did China, so did Japan, so did Russia, so did every other country, in fact, at a greater pace than we did. So our dollar got stronger, creating trillions of dollars into the system. So that's where it's equalized on the global economy scale. Getting into the weeds here a little bit, but I think it's important to know what is going on really does affect you, and it really does affect your strategy. But you start with the time. The time determines the risk. So is it 0 to 3 years? Do you need income? Do you need long-term? And then you look at, okay, what's the strategy that goes into those time periods? So again, that long-term, we talked about the S&P 500, and then we take a lot more strategic approach. So we overweight, underweight, and what sectors we think will do a little bit better than other sectors. And so later this year, a lot of people do believe that financials will outperform, and so in a rising interest rate environment. And so there's companies like JP Morgan that's pretty beat up, and I don't know why it's gone down some more this week. Honestly, I just really don't know why. But that means there's a buying opportunity. That means there's emotions involved, and when people are trading on fear, it's time for you to get greedy. And I love that about Warren Buffett. I mean, Warren Buffett is arguably the best investor of all time. He's the GOAT of investing. And so there's some other sectors that you can overweight in as well on going through that. But I would really encourage you to let time determine the risk and be well educated. And so that way you don't force your financial position into a hindrance based on just not knowing what's going on. And there's a lot of good free education out there, and the Real Money Pros podcast is one of them, but not the only one.
Thank you, man. I'm going to have Kent back. Thanks so much. He's going to come back and help me in the future classes a little bit. That's meat. Like I told you, this class is not going to be the baby steps. There's a lot of acronyms, and there's a lot of stuff that Kent went through right there. I understood every word, but I went to school in this, and I will tell you, part of the issues were next time, Kent, let's make sure I need to coordinate better. That was on me. We should have had his slides up there. That would have helped. That's meat, right? A lot of deep stuff, and it's deep stuff because you need to understand it. In this class, this is not the baby step class. We're going to have that class. And some people in here, I've already talked to, they need that. But I want to finish with some questions. Thanks, Ken. I didn't want to cut you off, but I know you're coming back, so I knew I could do it. When we get into investing, it's complicated. The up the hill is complicated. I loved the analogies that we used, the up the hill. I love that. And it's so true. We talked about that before. Next week, we're going to talk going down the hill. We have a colleague of Roger's coming. His name is Jim Hughes. Another colleague of his name, Tyrell Stevens, who's a tax expert. And we're going to have Kent back again on some other stuff. And we're going to talk about that retirement side. The retirement side of things and how we spend money. And I'm really going to dive into what God says our retirement should look like. Because honestly, in America, we're blessed beyond measure. And God didn't plan for us to go just live on beaches. No offense, Roger. He planned us to keep working for his kingdom. right? We need to be growing his kingdom. And when we have more time, our talents can flourish. When we have more resources, we can do more. I started this class with a parable. Do you notice the guy that had 5 talents, 5 bags of gold? What did God do? He took away the wicked servant's money and he gave it to the guy that has the most. That doesn't sound like socialism to me. And you can take your political views and shove them. I'm just kidding. The point is, God is not this is not a political move. Obviously, I'm just joking. What I mean is this. God's saying, the guy that does good with it, I'm going to give more. Because he's good with it. He's using it for what I want him to. And if you want to be blessed, do what God wants, and he will bless you to do more of what he wants. Right? That's the truth. He says, I can read you scripture. He says, I don't bless you because you'll only use it for your own selfish desires. Right? So let's close in prayer, and we'll open up to any questions. We're kind of running late, so instead of shouting them out, I will have these 2 guys around and myself, and you can just come up and ask us. But I do want to start leaving some time open for questions. But Father, I just want to thank you for this night. Thank you for the 2 guys that spoke tonight, both Roger and Kent. I'm so thankful for them. Thankful they came and shared their talents with us tonight. I pray that you go with each or every one of us, giving travel mercies and keep everyone safe and healthy. Help us to know how to navigate this up the hill investment strategy so that we can grow our assets to help grow your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.